Okay. So good to meet you. What would you like to talk about?
Well, Robert, it's a pleasure to be with you. I have very little knowledge about space activities, but I am always very curious, and I don't have a career, let's say, but I started my involvement with the sea in a very simple way, just rowing. And in '84, I went rowing from Africa to Brazil on a very little boat, and it was a very, very hard and very happy trip at the end. And after that, I made more than 45 expeditions to the Antarctic, and that's my passion today. It's the difference is that I travel on boats we design ourselves, and we build them here in Brazil. And my first trip to Antarctica was very funny because they said, "Oh, Jesus, sailing by yourself, single-handed to Antarctica, it's very dangerous. You have the risk of being trapped by the ice, and you may have to stay a full year if you are trapped in the ice." And I heard that so often that then I decided, well, I will go down there not to explore Antarctica in the summer when only 3 or 4 months are open, but I will stay there for a full year. And I decided to stay, and it was a very funny experience, which I had the privilege of repeating many times.
So have you done these voyages all by yourself, or do you have a team that you do this with?
No, by myself.
Really?
Well, I had a team, but a team that helped to design the boats, build the boats. I'm not an engineer. I would like to be. I love engineering, but I had to hire people, and this boatyard made maybe 40 boats, which are sailing in all oceans today, and all of these boats, they are in aluminum. But it was just for fun. I don't know how this became a kind of a business. I didn't want it to be a business, but it was just for fun. And I had the privilege of being in places in Antarctica where no other boats have never been, and I've been there by myself. But I always had a very funny and competent team behind.
Okay. Well, space is different than that. Okay. That is, well, it's certainly possible for an individual to fly alone in space. The first astronauts and cosmonauts did, but they didn't build their own spaceships, or launch vehicles, and they had a very large team help operating the mission. In terms of myself, I became fascinated with space. Well, perhaps was always, but what was decisive for me was a Sputnik. That is the first satellite the Russians, the Soviets launched a Sputnik. And while that may have been terrifying to the adults to be as a 5-year-old child who was already reading science fiction, this was very exciting. It meant that the stories I was reading about space travel were going to be true, and I wanted to be part of it. And so as a child, I learned all the science I could, and later on I got a technical education, and went to work in the aerospace industry. And then in 1996, I started my own company, Pioneer Astronautics. And we do technology development for NASA. done a lot of different technologies for them, ranging from balloon technology and rockets to making propellants on Mars out of local materials, which is our specialty. That is making technologies to utilize local materials, turning materials into resources, because a material is not a resource until you have the technology that can do something useful with it. And to me, the essence of the settlement to space is that being able to turn extraterrestrial materials into resources. That's what defines whether an environment is habitable for you. If the things that are there are resources for you, or if they're not. To me, that is the central issue. Anyway, that's where I am. I have not done any individual voyages into space. I've contributed technologies to large organizations which are sending people into space.
Well, but I think as being an astronaut or argonaut, I don't know how to say, sorry for my very poor English, but I think you may feel a very huge responsibility of being the last link of a very long chain of competences and people and structure and technologies. And I am really fascinated by technology, despite the fact that I'm not an engineer. And I learned a lot in the boats we have built to sail down to Antarctica, and in many years. We started to mix two kinds of different technologies or knowledges, or the academic knowledge of the universities and conventional technology, and the knowledge of people, very poor people. You know, in Brazil, we are a very poor country, but we have a very solid tradition on boat building, which is not recognized in the country. And I've been traveling around all the country, and I discovered that we have very competent engineers, which who they don't have teeth on their mouths. They cannot read, but they have a very long experience on depending on the sea for living. And I started to study their boat designs and their very simple, humble technologies. And we started to mix this to the boats we decided to build. So I went down to Antarctica with the first sailing boats with freestanding rigging, carbon fiber. Of course, I would not use the woods they use in Amazonas, northern Brazil. But this mix of knowledges was very, very funny. And many people, they ask, what motivates you to keep going on? And I think is that long, very long chain that I believe you have behind your activities and explorations, and that it's very, very nice. I enjoy that very, very much.
So tell me about your boats. Are they wood? Are they steel? Are they monohull boats? Are they catamarans? How many masts do they have? What's the nature of the rig?
My first boat was a rowing boat with less than 6 meters long, made in West system, wood epoxy saturation technique. Very nice little boat, classic design, and I used it to row from Namibia in Africa to Bahia in Brazil. But then I became involved with aluminum boats, and I made the first sailing boat in aluminum to be stranded, to be trapped in the ice in Antarctica. And that was a very funny experience because everyone would say, "Ah, ha, ha, what are you going to do to kill your time and to pass your time?" And I was surprised because one year was I stayed in Antarctica by myself for 14 months, and it was a nightmare because I had no providers. I had to do everything by myself. I had to produce heat, I had to produce energy, electricity, food, water, maintenance, hydraulic maintenance, sailing maintenance, ice maintenance on the deck. And it was very funny because 14 months they spent as fast as a long weekend. And after that, I decided to transform this in a kind of a regular activity, and I started to sail down to Antarctica every year, and finally I managed to contaminate my family. And one day my wife, she said, "Well, that's too much. We will not wait for you 5, 6, 14 months anymore. We will go together." And then we started to sail with our daughters down to Antarctica. And now they have more than, I don't know, half a dozen, 8, 9 trips down to Antarctica. And they have a very deep knowledge about sustainability, the Antarctic problems, contamination, the efficient use of resources, and we are very happy. And this is the heritage we would like to leave for them. We decided we will not give one little penny for them when we die. We will give our experiences. And my wife said some time ago, she said, no, we will even not give our experience as heritage for them. We will teach them to build their own experience. And so that's what they are doing now.
Cool. So, in space right now, we have it's called an entrepreneurial revolution going on. That is, the space race started out US, Soviet governments racing to exceed each other. Initially, the Soviets were ahead, but then the United States pulled ahead and landed people on the moon. And that was a geopolitical contest with many ramifications. But for better or worse, it did certainly motivate the government-led space programs very strongly for a period of time. But once that had been settled, the space programs, the government-led space programs, lost much of their motivation. They still had a scientific motivation, but that was a secondary part of the program. And so you still had a purpose-driven space exploration program with rovers and telescopes and such. But in terms of astronauts, they haven't gone anywhere beyond Earth orbit since 1973. The human spaceflight programs became what I call vendor-driven rather than purpose-driven. They rather than spending money to do things, they're doing things to spend money, distribute funds to various districts and companies. And this has caused a stagnation in our space program. But there have been people who nevertheless, of course this includes me, but are convinced of the value of human expansion into space for a positive human future, not to show up the Soviet Union or this or that, but to expand the possibilities for humanity in the future. And since the governments haven't been doing that, entrepreneurs have started to do it. Of course, the most famous one is Elon Musk, who I know. I helped recruit him to make space his mission, make Mars his mission. Wasn't the only one, but played a role. And what's happening here is what Musk and his team at SpaceX have done is they've proven that it's possible for a small team, private team led by entrepreneurs to be able to do things that previously it was thought that only the governments of superpowers could do. And not only that, it could do it in 1/3 the time at 1/10 the cost, and even do things that they had thought were impossible altogether. And as a result, space flight is becoming much cheaper. And there's going to be a lot more of it because it's much cheaper. And I believe that it is going to make possible the settlement of Mars, that there will be a new world. People sometimes ask me, well, what will the government be like on this new world? And I say, well, there'll probably be a lot of governments on this new world. And there'll be people with all sorts of ideas of what those governments should be like. And the ones that come up with the best ideas, that create the best lives, they'll be the ones that get the immigrants. They'll be the ones that grow. And they will be the ones that set the pattern, not only for Mars, but for Earth. In other words, if you've got something better, people will go there. If you don't, they won't. So anyway, that's what's going on now. That's the vision that I'm trying to contribute to.
And when was the Sputnik expedition? Which year was?
1957.
57. And you was a child at the time.
Yes, I was.
Wow, that's very inspiring. And I feel that we have a new flame on this space exploration, on a different pattern, maybe on private means. And I'm very happy of that, because I think all your activities, they resume all the knowledge we have on Earth, and I think this is fantastic. And I had some similar idea about the sea explorations. I loved to read about the explorations of the early Antarctic explorers, the old Portuguese expansion around the Indian Ocean, the Orient. And I think, wow, the story of the Apollo expeditions to the moon on the analogic age is absolutely fantastic. The last 12 expeditions I made down to Antarctica, I never used a chart, a nautical chart anymore. We always use a little piece of glass, an iPhone, a tablet, or something like this. The tools we have today, they are absolutely fantastic. But I love to compare with the short of knowledge they had 300, 400, 500 years ago. And I think we have a very nice panorama for the future in terms of knowledge, innovation, solutions, even commercial proposals for exploring the space. And I see almost the same thing happening right now in Antarctica. Now it's very expensive for us to make private expeditions down to Antarctica, and more you see commercial expeditions going down there, and we meet them every year. But I think this possibilities of the future, they are absolutely fascinating, and I would like to believe I would live 60, 70 years more to see what's going to happen. But I may believe that your activity may become very popular for our sons and the future generations.
You know, it's possible to sail in space
To
using,
say,
that's right. A method of propulsion is to use reflectors to reflect sunlight and have sunlight push a spacecraft. And these are called solar sails. And it's been in the literature for a very long time, over 100 years. But about 10 years ago, the Japanese actually used solar sails to send a probe to Venus. The sails have to be very large because the pressure from sunlight is quite low. But you can use very lightweight foils and sail around the solar system.
and the sails, they are conceived to catch sun energy and produce propulsion, or
No, they just reflect the sunlight, and sunlight actually has a certain amount of momentum. Okay. If you had 1,000,000 square meters of sail, it will produce about 1 kilogram of force. About the same force as the weight of 1 kilogram. So 1,000,000 square meters. Well, what is that? That's 1,000. That's a square kilometer. Right. So a sail that is a square kilometer in size will produce 1 kilogram of force and 9 newtons. And if you and these sails can be very lightweight, and in space, a very small push can add up over time because there is no drag. You're not pushing against water or like you are in a boat. Okay, you're in vacuum, so little push can just keep accelerating you, and this is possible, and in fact, it's been done.
And you don't have changes in this push. I mean, you don't have storms.
Well, the closer you get to the sun, the stronger it is. The further away you are, the weaker it is. But unlike the wind, it's quite regular and predictable.
Wow, that's fantastic. But a square kilometer should be made in which material?
Well, you want to use a very lightweight material, similar to the balloon film. That is, if you know the materials that are used in high altitude balloons, except you would aluminize them so that they're reflective. The films themselves are less than 10 microns thick. So that's 10 grams per square meter. And 10 tons per square kilometer. So a square kilometer of such material would weigh about 10 tons. But if you're pushing it, you say, oh, 1 kilogram of force. Well, since there's no drag, it accelerates it very slowly, but it builds up over time. 1 kilogram of force over 1,000 seconds will impart the same amount of force as a ton of force over 1 second. Okay.
Wow.
So 1 kilogram of force over 10,000 seconds, which is about 3 hours, will import the same amount of force as 10 tons over 1 second.
And
So you can.
They are not photovoltaic. So
No, they're not photovoltaic. We're talking here about simply using the push of sunlight.
So there are some kind of, sorry for my ignorance, but you have some kind of streams or currents in the space.
Well, no, it's the light pressure from the sun itself. Now, you do have additional sources of pressure in space, the solar wind, which are particles, but the main thing is the light itself. And you know, Johannes Kepler, who was the astronomer who came up with the laws of planetary motion back around 1600, said, because he realized that the planets were worlds flying through space. They weren't just lights in the sky. He said that ships and sails will be fastened, will be developed. He realized, see, comets, the tail of a comet always points away from the sun. And that is because it is being blown by the solar light pressure. The reason why the tail of a comet is like a flag on a sailboat. The flag always points downwind. The tail of a comet always points downwind. And Kepler saw this, and he realized that someday it would be possible to create ships that would sail on this wind.
Wow. I am very proud of what I did, not because no one has done it before around sailing around Antarctica in the Antarctic Convergence, but because I decided to do it with a kind of a rig, which is very funny, which is called aero rig, which is inspired in aviation instead of just using conventional rig with halyards and steel cables. And so on my first trip down to Antarctica, long trip around, I made it twice. I used on the second boat where I had two rigs, very, very high rig with a NACA, I don't know how to say in English, a NACA.
Airfoil?
Airfoil, yes. Very, very long, 35% higher than a conventional rig, but absolutely flexible and freestanding. So I could sail, I could put the rig 360 degrees around the boat. And this was very useful to sail single-handed. And since then, I became very interested in all these technologies and developments. But I didn't know that we can, maybe in the future, we can use this spatial wind to sail in space. That's absolutely fantastic.
Yeah. So we have a question about life on Mars. Dana is asking if life on Mars is complex as Earth, or is it simpler? This is a very interesting question, and actually we don't know. On one level, one would assume it's simpler. Okay, the life. Okay, first of all, is there life on Mars? We don't know that either, but I suspect that there is, because life appeared on Earth virtually as soon as it could. Almost as soon as the Earth was cool enough for liquid water, microbes appeared. We have fossils of microbes going back 3.5 billion years. At that time, Earth and Mars were quite similar. They were both warm, wet planets with mostly carbon dioxide atmospheres. The Earth's atmosphere has been changed by life. The reason why there's oxygen in the Earth's atmosphere is because of green plants. It wouldn't be there, and it wasn't there until actually comparatively recently in the history of the Earth, when green plants became quite prevalent. So Mars, one would expect that life appeared on Mars. Life could have evolved locally on Earth, that is, chemistry could have come together somehow to form life, or it could be that life is flying around in space, seeds of microbes, and that as soon as a planet becomes acceptable, they take root there, they land, and then they multiply. Those are two possibilities. Now, if the second possibility is true, then probably the first life on Mars was practically the same as life on Earth. But if the other possibility, if life on Earth originated on its own, and then life on Mars also originated on its own, it could be very different. Portuguese and English use essentially the same alphabet, the Roman alphabet. Okay. So even though they're different languages, they use the same alphabet, just like all life on Earth uses the same alphabet for its information, DNA and RNA. But Chinese is a different alphabet. Okay. It's not just a little bit different, like, Russian is significantly different than the Latin alphabet, but it uses the same principles, letters that spell out sounds. Chinese is not based on that principle at all. It's a completely different information system. It can do the same thing. You can write books in it, but it's not even based on using letters to make sounds like Arabic or Hebrew are. They're similar to the Latin alphabet in that respect. In fact, because they all have a common origin in the Phoenician alphabet. But the Chinese alphabet is based on pictures, not based on sounds. And it's a completely different information system. Now, that could, if life originated on Mars separately, it could have a completely different information system. It's different than life on Earth and the genetic code of life on Earth as English and Portuguese are from Chinese. And so it could be very different. And there's no way of knowing if it is different, whether it's a better information system or a worse information system. Okay, that is, we've had computers, actually, there's been computers on Earth for about 150 years. The first computers were basically adding machines that used gears and levers and things of this kind to perform computations. Later on, they had computers that used vacuum tubes and switches, things of that kind. And then more recently, of course, transistors and semiconductors and silicon chips. And they have greater possibilities, these more advanced computational technology. The information system and the computational system used by extraterrestrial life could be, different. And if it's different, one or the other could be better. So this poses very interesting questions for biotechnology, which is, I think, going to be one of the great technologies of the 21st century. Could there be better information systems for self-reproducing organisms, programmable organisms, than the stuff we see on Earth? You might find it on Mars.
Wow. Sorry, what's the temperature on the Mars surface and the gravity force amount?
Okay, well, the gravity is 1/3 of Earth. Okay. Now, the temperature on the surface of Mars is mostly colder than Earth, although at its warmest, at the equator, it gets to about 20 centigrade at the midday. But in the average temperature on Mars is about -50 centigrade. But that's at the surface. Underground, it's warmer. We know there's no liquid water on the surface of Mars. It's all ice. But underground, there's liquid water, because as you go down, it gets warmer. So if there's life on Mars today, it's probably underground.
Wow. And what is the expectation in time to believe to be so we could be able to have some activity in Mars. It's a period of time of 10 years, 20 years.
Well, of course, we have robot explorers on Mars right now. But if we're talking about people going to Mars, I think the first people will probably go to Mars around 2030.
Sorry, 2030?
2030, within 10 years or so.
9 to 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, this is fantastic. Well, I would like to invite you, if you come to Brazil. We have a nautical base, very nice, in a colonial town in Paraty, which is a very funny a nice place, lots of tropical fjords. And
how far is that from Rio de Janeiro?
It's very close from Rio de Janeiro. It's about 2 or 3 hours from Rio de Janeiro. And,
by car?
By car. And we started a small nautical base, which became one of the biggest Brazilian wet marinas. And we have boats sailing from all countries in the world, mostly crazy couples sailing with children or without any kind of money or resources, and we really learn a lot with them. And we like to learn with them all the technologies. These very simple solutions they apply on their boats, and we use this on the boats we build for our customers. And you are welcome. It's called Marina do Engenho.
Well, I'd be very interested in that. I in my youth, I sailed on sailboats, and so I know how to sail, and I'd love to do it. But I have a question for you. I can remember back in the 1980s, there were some newspaper stories about the wreck of a Roman ship being found near or in the harbor of Rio de Janeiro. They found jars of a kind that the Romans used, and it was said that there was a shipwreck there of a Roman ship. Do you know anything about this?
I heard about that, but this story was never followed again, which is a big pity. So I started my first cruising trip, rowing from Africa to South America, not because I wanted to establish any kind of stupid record, or, but because I love to study history. And I realized that the Portuguese in the 15th and 16th century, they were the first nation who understood the anticyclonic movements of the oceans. And this was their real knowledge and their real fortune. And they understood that the North Atlantic was a rotating system, an anticyclone, turning around a high pressure system in the North Atlantic, not far from the Azores. And I don't know how they conclude that on the southern hemisphere, this system was the opposite, like a big turning system on the opposite way. So the South Atlantic, they understood, was rotating on anti-clockwise direction, and they used that for going around the Cape of Good Hope and then on the Indian Ocean. And this knowledge was fantastic because at the time they had lots of problems to calculate the longitude. Longitude is a time. It's a calculation which depends on precise time. But they discovered a way to find the latitude, and they found the latitude based on the real midday high. And this was a very powerful knowledge. So they have quite a good notion of the latitude where they were, but not such a precise notion of the longitude. And I was fascinated by these stories, and started to study astronomy, and then I realized that they had to come from Portugal to Europe, to the Indian Ocean. They had to go along the Brazilian shore, and on the way back they had to come up the African shore. And this was fascinating, and that's how I built my stupid idea of rowing on the way they always knew they used. So I made a kind of a cure from South Africa to northern Brazil, going around this high pressure center in the South Atlantic, which is maybe a little bit south of Ascension Island or Santa Helena Island. But it was very interesting for a guy studying economics to become involved with all these new informations and old technologies. And finally, we decided to start a kind of a museum in southern Brazil, not to show the culture of building boats, but to trying to show the knowledge lessons, these very apparently very simple boats they have to show. And we have now a museum in San Francisco in southern Brazil, which has more than 200 local typical boats, and the idea is exactly to show all this kind of knowledge, very simple but very powerful knowledge these people from the sea they have.
Great. Okay. So yeah, no, I'd be very interested in coming sailing with you. Are there interesting diving places, coral reefs and such in Brazil?
Yes, we have very nice places, but we don't have nice and clear water like you have in the Caribbean or in the Indian Ocean, in the Maldives. My first sailing boat, which I used to overwinter in Antarctica, and in which I went around I made a trip around Antarctica, is now trapped in the Falkland Islands. And because last year we went 3 times down to Antarctica, and I made a mistake. I left the boat in the Falklands. We went down in another sailing boat, and then the pandemic started, and now we are not allowed to bring the boat back. But I was very amazed. The Falklands, they are in a very high latitude, almost 57 degrees of southern latitude, and the weather is very, very hard. It's very cold, but the water is absolutely spectacular. We don't have that kind of water in Brazil. It's absolutely crystal clear water with white sandy beaches, and it's a touristic destination, very unknown for the world, and especially for Brazilians, which is very, very, very nice. So after diving in the Falklands, I said, wow, we have a very poor place for diving in Brazil, because we don't have so much clear waters as they have.
Why is the water not clear in Brazil?
I don't know. I think it's first because on this rounding system, the anticyclonic system, we receive hot waters, which are very rich with elements, and the water is never so clear as you have in the Indian Ocean or in the Caribbean. But we have a very, very nice and, how would I say, sympathetic places, very nice places to visit, simple, with local communities living still on their original way. So people from abroad, they like to dive around here. We have an archipelago called Fernando de Noronha, which has nice water, but normally the water we have for diving, they are not so spectacular as you have in other places like in Florida or in the Caribbean or in the Indian Ocean.
So even when you go offshore in your boat, it remains muddy, cloudy water in Brazil. It's not just on the very coast itself.
Well, when I'm not a regular diver, I only dive when we have problems with an anchor trapped in between the rocks or something like that. But we don't have so many beautiful places to dive, but we have very beautiful natural places with wood. We have a property in Paraty beside our marina, where we have a very impressive forest, very green. So every time I go to Antarctica, and then when we spend 3, 4, 5 months sailing in the ice, in the very hard southern conditions, when we go home back, it's a huge, huge pleasure to come home and see all these little bays with very small beaches of 30 meters, 100 meters, and huge green trees and green water. It's a big pleasure for us to make this contrast in everything. But usually we don't stop in Argentina because it's a pity, but Argentina became a very nasty place for sailing boats, lots of corruption and bureaucratic complications every time we go inside an harbor. So usually we come directly from Patagonia, Falklands, or the Antarctic Peninsula. We sail directly to our home base, and it's a terrible, huge pleasure to suddenly to see all these green mountains, rocks, forests.
Have you ever sailed through the Straits of Magellan to go to the Pacific?
Yes, many times. I don't like the Magellan Channel because it's very windy and it's quite dry. I prefer to access the Pacific through the Beagle Channel, which is much more colder, maybe more storms, but then you have the high mountains, the forests, and you have the snow. So it's very beautiful, and I am absolutely chemical dependent on centauias. I love the king crab they have down there, and we became friend of all the fishermen in the Beagle Channel who fish the centauia, the southern king crab, and we enjoy very much stopping in those small harbors and glaciers and fishing some centauias and then cooking them with a good Argentinian or Chilean wine. So it's a big pleasure for us every year.
Sounds like fun. You know, on
Hello,
Mars.
guys.
Yes.
Hi, Robert. I'm here. It's amazing, but I have a question for both of you, if you allowed me.
Okay.
First of all, Amir, in all the tours that you made around the world and the water, you have a great story that you remember all the time, and you tell to everybody the story because it's funny, or because it's a story that you always will remember and always will tell to your children, your grandchildren?
Funny story. Well, I
Something
think
that always happened and you always remember, and you always say to everybody, guys, let me tell you a story that happened with me, and one day that I was in the boat in the middle of the nowhere.
well, I must be very grateful because I never had unhappy trips. I always made funny expeditions, and I always finished them in good health, with the boat in perfect condition. But I think the first funny story I like to tell to my daughters, when I finished the Atlantic rowing, I had 5 ham radios which were following me, and I thought they were the whole world. The day I said I cannot give my position, cannot calculate my position because I am surrounded by coconut trees, then thousands of ham radios of all over the world came in the frequency, and I had just a 100-watt radio. I was not able to give the position, so I just turned off the radio, and suddenly a fisherman came beside my boat, and he said, "You don't have a motor?" I said, "No." "You don't have a sail?" I said, "No." "And how was your fishing?" And then I said, "Well, I'm sorry, I didn't catch any fish." And he said, "Oh, that's life. Some days." Some days you have catch. Other days you don't have. And then he asked me the final question, which was my problem. He said, "Where are you coming from?" And I said, "Jesus, what should I say?" And then I said, "Well, I'm coming from Africa." And then he just said, "Well, I don't know where this beach is, but it must be close from from here." And then he went away. And 2 hours later, I didn't came down to the beach. I was 30 meters with my anchor, 30 meters away from Brazil. But I was so happy. I didn't want to put my foot on land yet. And 2 hours later, he came again beside my boat and brought me 2 sardines, very bad smelling sardines. And he said, "Sorry, it's the only fish I have to give you."
Amazing.
So
Thank
there
you.
was no big reception, flares, friends celebrating, none of those old stupid things. It
Thank
was
you
a
very
very,
much.
very nice finishing.
Amazing. And Robert, if you allow me, Mars, everybody say it's red planet, and the Earth, it's blue. So if you combine the 2 planets together, you think you are going to have a better civilization? It's possible, it's not possible. What do you think?
Oh yeah, I think it's possible, because we're going to have more different civilizations. On Mars, you have a whole world where the rules haven't been written yet. And I think that there will be many settlements on Mars, and they will have many different sets of laws and customs, and based on different ideas on how people can live better together. And some of those ideas will be better, some will not. The ones that are not will fail, but the ones that will succeed, they will be the experiments that show the way. Okay, so there'll be an example to the other Martian colonies, and there'll be an example to the Earth. Okay, and then we will have a humanity that is bigger, but better because it has investigated more possibilities. I'm going to have to actually go soon, but this has really been great. I really appreciate the opportunity to have spoken with you here.
Thank you. Thank you. To the final question that I have to both of you. You know, there are Brazilian fans of Amir Clinton and Brazilian fans of NASA and orbit and space. Your final words to the Brazilian fans, to the people who want to explore the new frontier, the new boundaries around the world.
Well, my final word is you can do it. Okay, there's no reason why Brazil cannot be part of the great frontier. You know, Brazil is part of this new world. It can be part of the next new world. And if it wants to be a great nation, it needs to, because great nations do great things.
Yes. Yes. Amir, please.
Well, I have a very positive message. I think we never had so many tools to do fantastic things as we are doing now. We have some polarity problems right now, but we have so many fantastic tools to go to this new future, to this new frontier, as we never had before. So I just would like to inspire people to do what they dream to do, and I think we all are able to do.
Thank you, guys. Unfortunately, we are in the end of this amazing and enriching conversation, and I'm very grateful to hear both of the story of both genius guys, one here in the Earth, other in the Mars. So thank you very much for participating in the Pretzel project. And I hope that you enjoy so much as I am enjoying here this talk.
Robert, we would like to invite you. We have a very nice and simple but paradisiac guest house. The town where we are, it's called Paraty. Paraty means for you. You are always welcome. It was an honor to talk to you.
I appreciate it. And if you're ever in Colorado, come and visit me. Okay.
Thank you very much, guys. Thank you very much. And see you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.